Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so maybe we'll start. I will share my screen. First of all, thank you everyone for joining. I guess everybody's pretty busy preparing for the classes next week. So we're very glad that you guys came. Can everyone see the screen okay? Oh, hold on.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Good. Okay, so today's presentation, as Heather said, is about using speed reading for low-level learners. Before we start, a little bit about myself. So before coming to Japan, I was an English conversation teacher in Taiwan. And then what had happened was I became an AOT in junior high school. And I was actually crazy enough to get a Japanese teaching license. And now I'm at Meika University with Rob. And Rob?
Yeah, I was when I first came to Japan on the JET program, so that was a trip up in Aomori, and then yeah, I spent quite a lot of time with Berlitz, mostly one-on-one classes, and you know, one thing I did notice there is, you know, the really good speakers, either they had spent time abroad, spent a lot of time with people who had, or they'd done a lot of reading. And so that really helped boost me on the interest into extensive reading. But yeah, been at Meikai for the last few years, and yeah, nice people all around. Thanks.
Okay, so before we start, I'd like to ask everyone, let's see, what kind of reading habits do our students have? So you can write your answer in the chat. How much daily reading, English or Japanese, do you think your students actually do? Or actually, before we ask that question, how many people actually read at least even once a day? If you can write something in the chat. So for example, only 10% of our students do any kind of reading in a day, or 20%, or everybody studies because we have wonderful students. Yeah, only when it's given as assignment. Yeah, yeah, that's pretty much it. So I looked into this study by Co-op, which is kind of the catering company for private and public universities in Japan, and they did a lifestyle of university student study. And what you can see here is that roughly almost 50% of the students say they do no reading, which is pretty scary, but judging from everyone's comments, I think that could be true. But for the people that actually do read, so say you have a class of 40 and you have 20 students that actually read, on average, they say they read around 64 minutes a day. So a little bit more than an hour. So the next question is, how much studying do our students do? Any guess how many minutes of studying they do a day? So my students, maybe 15, 20 at the most. So if you have any comments, it'd be nice. Okay. So according to the study, what happened was they said that our students in Japan study roughly an hour a day. And if you look at fourth year students, because they had their graduate thesis, and et cetera, they study a little bit more. So compared to the first to third years, the fourth years study around 72 minutes a day, which is not too bad, but not as much as we would study back home, I think. So before we start, could you raise your hand or give us a reaction if you've done any speed reading or extensive reading in the classroom? I'd like to kind of see what kind of knowledge everyone has so I can adjust the presentation accordingly. Okay. Okay, good. Okay, thank you very much. So let's talk about today's presentation. So it's going to be in three parts. First, we're going to identify the issue. Why did Rob and I even start speed reading? And then we'll go over our solutions. And then if we could get some feedback from you guys, that'd be very wonderful because we can sort of talk together and see how we can help our students in our classroom, because every situation could be different. So a little bit of background of the students that Rob and I teach. Basically, our students have 8 comma of English a week. They're English majors. And Rob and I, we teach the integrated English class twice a week. And most of the other classes are taught by the Japanese teachers. So in other words, a lot of the classes are taught in Japanese. They do a lot of intensive reading, grammar translation. So when the first year when Rob and I teach, it's always like pulling teeth, and it's hard to get them to speak, and they're a little bit scared at first. Okay, so but as a school, we have a school-wide curriculum. So we have a text. It's kind of like in high school where there's a textbook that we have to teach, and we don't have the authority to change it. So Rob and I were like, oh no, our students are struggling. What can we do? So what we did was our speed reading course was put into the integrated English speaking class. Okay, and now Rob will take over for what we did for the first semester.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, and let's see, is that back up? Okay, great. Then let's move on to that. So first, yeah, why speed reading? We noticed very quickly that the students just couldn't keep up with the textbook, what we needed them to read to understand, to follow the class. When we'd have them, read sections aloud, sometimes that was quite slow as well. Partly vocabulary, partly sentence structure. But I think this is something a lot of people run into. And I'm sure if you haven't had this, you're very lucky, but you ask them a question to write something or even to read something, they reach for the phones. And, either line translation, Google Lens, something similar, they just want a machine to do it. It's become second nature. And, this does not bode well for learning a second language. All right. And, because you can't do that every single time, you can't do that in the middle of a conversation, you can't do that on tests. This crutch that everyone had started to rely on, it was giving them real problems, not being able to have it. And their motivation was suffering. So we'd had a lot of students giving up, frankly. Attrition is a real problem. So we decided, okay, can we do anything about this reading issue at least? If they can read, they can understand, they can absorb it, then hopefully they can, start doing more with it in class. So we decided to find out, okay, can we increase reading speed with some kind of intervention, a bit of speed reading? And also, can we get them to feel differently about it? Can we affect their attitudes at a speed reading at a accessible level, at the I+1 level? So keeping those in mind is what we started out with. We did a couple of speed reading studies. The first one was quite limited, but it was an introduction to extensive reading, a big contrast to the intensive reading that they are expected to do in all their other classes. And then after the reasonable success of that, we expanded it into the next semester. Okay. And we'll see where this takes us in the future. Okay. So the design of this one. With our classes combined, we had 25 students. There's 2 90-minute classes a week. And with everything else we had to do in class, there wasn't a whole lot of time we could devote to it, but we had these sessions that we conducted as a warm-up. We were able to do this about 12 times. Okay. Our students, they're reasonably low on the CEFR scales, A1, A2 level in general. So their reading levels, the students really hadn't done much reading for pleasure. They don't do outside reading. You might expect this kind of level from junior high school students, first-year high school students. And, when we asked them about their high school classes, it was mostly grammar translation, not much speaking, not much enjoyable reading. Okay, so we had our work cut out for us, clearly. So the first course, we wanted to start with simple stories, SSS. The SEG group has this, it's part of their curriculum, and we want to implement as warm-up. So this is Yomitore 50. Is anyone familiar with this? Any news to anybody? No? Okay. Yeah, it's fairly widely used across Japan, but apparently not by our students. So our first SR class, we'd have something like this. We would say, okay, everybody ready? And put up a short reading like this using a projector. It's roughly 50 words, which, you know, can be done fairly quickly if you're a reader. However, it's not exactly 50 words every time, which is where part of the problem came in. But, you know, to make sure that they are focusing, there'd be 2 comprehension questions and a quick opinion question. So, you know, it serves not just as reading, but as a warm-up. Okay. Pros, yeah. Good points was that there's a familiar narrative to it. You know, this is a story of a exchange student coming to Japan, living with a host family. So these are situations in Japan that are like, oh yeah, I know what that is. There's an illustration for each one. You know, they're cute. They give some idea of, you know, it kind of grounds them in the situation. And yeah, for vocabulary they're not familiar with, they're lost. It's low tech. We're just projecting it on the screen, you know, overhead projector. And yeah, reasonably inexpensive. It's a small book. Students didn't really have to like buy anything in this case. On the other hand, it's not as controlled with the vocabulary. You know, a lot of stuff did have to be gloss. Because the length was not exactly 50 words, we'd have to use this chart, you know, to adjust. So if it was 41 words, then you'd have to look at this row, this column to measure your reading speed, which made the time entry a little bit troublesome and probably introduced some error into our measurement. Also, viewing difficulty. I don't know about your students, but some of ours didn't wear glasses that they should be wearing, that they had, but they, you know, why are you sitting in the back? Why are you not looking at the screen? Oh, you actually can't read it from there. Can you please move up? You know, so this was a problem that they, you know, socializing is an issue, but they wouldn't tell you in many cases. So if you have students that are not paying enough attention, sometimes see if they need glasses, see if there's a better solution. In any case, what we got from the results after, you know, 12 or so sessions of this is that, you know, ordering by the, just measuring an average of the last 3 texts, yeah, we had a fairly decent increase in reading speed, about, you know, 7.5%. You know, and this is average. We've definitely had some bigger gains for some students, some backwards movement by some students, but on the whole, it was a speed increase. Another way to assess it was, you know, measuring the last reading by against the first reading. And looking at that, it was an even bigger increase, about 12%. You know, but again, there are sources of error. People have good days, bad days, sitting farther away, brighter lights, some difficult, uncontrolled vocabulary. So that introduced a bit of error. Still, we found these encouraging. The other thing that we measured was, of course, their attitudes. So yeah, 86% of them said they either liked or somewhat liked the speed reading activity. So, you know, this wasn't painful for them to do. They found that it was interesting. It was a warm-up. They had a positive attitude to it. And yeah, a full 79% students said that they liked reading in English a lot. So yeah, these are good changes. Okay. So yeah, we found an increase of 9 words a minute. Other studies have definitely measured bigger increases, you know, but of course conditions were a little bit different. We felt that it was acceptable though, because our goal is just to give them some extra comprehensible input and to boost their confidence. You know, the attitude change, the motivation was, I think, even a bigger goal than increasing the reading speed. And yeah, because of this, we were able to move on to a more regular speed reading in the second semester. Okay. As for some actual comments from the students, you know, pretty positive. You know, we had people who actually felt, wow, I've accomplished something. I can do this, you know. Another student finally like, you know what, I can read now. Like I didn't feel like I could before. Everything was too difficult, but like I can do this, and it's a starting point, you know. So that confidence boost made it, you know, in our eyes, fully worth it, you know, but there's always refinements we can make. So I guess at this point, I'll turn it back over to Tekka for the upgraded version in the second semester. Let me stop share. Okay. All right. Tekka?
Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Sure can.
Okay, good. So, thank you, Rob. So, due to the success of the first semester, what we did was we said, hey, let's try to increase their reading speed and get them to read more. As a summer vacation homework, we did ask them to read what's called the Oxford Classic Tales. It's around a 15-page graded reader made for children. Not everybody did it. So we thought, okay, so we got to get them to read more. So the course is a little bit more difficult. We use a course created by the Victoria University of Wellington, and this was created by Sonia Millet and Paul Nation. And what we did was we used the 500 word level. So use the 500 word level, and the passages were more controlled. So each passage is 300 words per passage. And when we actually ran the content through a concordance program, and we actually found that the Pollinations course was easier to read than the Yomitori 50. So because the people, well, Pollination is a vocabulary expert, so he was really, really good at controlling the vocabulary. And so we like to show you how they improved or didn't improve after doing this. So just as an example, there's around 20 stories from around the world. Like Peach, the first story is Peach Boy. They read like the Arabian Nights, Tom Sawyer. So the contents is very interesting. And what we did was we actually put the content into Google Forms. And then at the end of the Google Forms, there are 8 multiple choice questions. And what we did was we also gave the students a sheet of paper so they could record their progress and they can see their increase in their reading speed. Because it's a speaking course and it is a warm-up, what we usually did to wake people up and get ready for reading is we had a little picture describe game. So for example, we'd have pairs and then they would do janken. One person would turn away from the screen and we'd show the screen picture and they had to describe the picture and the other person would guess. So for example, if it's Peach Boy, the first person would try to describe a peach as a warm-up, and then we have like old people or treasure or goblins. So we would change the picture depending on the content of the story. And as you can see here, to control it, we put it all into Google Classroom. So for if anyone was missed class, they could actually do the speed reading on their own time at home. And if you see here, this is what it actually kind of looks like. Okay, so we have the questions. We asked them to get roughly 6 out of the 8 questions correct. And what we really emphasize is you don't have to get perfect. The idea is to be able to read faster, increase your fluency. So what we did was we used the same, if we look at the same results, we used the Chang Nation's 2006 calculations of the average of the first 3 speed reading times and then the last 3 texts. We actually found out that they're reading at 200 words a minute, but their reading speed didn't increase. But if you compare the first semester where they were only reading around 140 words a minute, this is actually a pretty good improvement. We also tried the first versus last scoring method, which is also in Tongan Nation, and actually the speed decreased. So as we said before, it's the first, if you do the first versus last scoring method, the scoring can be a little bit unstable sometimes. Okay, so how did our university actually compare to other universities? Here, there's a list of speed reading courses from different universities. So if you look at Robson 2019, what they did was they used the 1,000 word level, which is a series about next to the 500. And there was like a 10 words a minute increase. Milliner 2021, he actually used the same 500 word series as us, yet there was a 50 word increase. And there's the French 2023, and he was actually taught a writing course, and he used speed reading as a warm-up in the writing course. And he was able to get a 25 word increase. So if we see our times, if we look at the term 1, so C and M is Chang and Moriarty. So we went from 123 to 136 words per minute, which is roughly the same or a little bit lower, but kind of like the Milner study. And if we see at the regular 500 words pollinations course, they were at the 200 words. So compared to the nation, because these are all studies from universities in Japan, our students were actually reading very quickly. But I think like one of the reasons is we did not really ask for accuracy as much as the other studies. Most of the time when we do speed reading, we ask for roughly 70% accuracy. But in our case, we were just trying to get our students to read and enjoy English. So the score, if you see the scores out of 8, they usually range anywhere from 4 to 7 out of 8. So their accuracy is a bit lower, but they were very, very good students that would just listen to what we'd say. So they were actually able to read faster. What I've noticed that when I tried speed reading in a science university was that because they're so into trying to get a perfect score, that they read slower than students from other universities. So now for the discussion. So what we see is that overall, the students' reading skills increased quite a bit. And when we were actually trying to teach the conversation course textbook, they were using a lot less Google Lens and and line translators. So what it used to take us an hour to do like 1.5 pages, we could do it in around 30 to 40 minutes. So although after using the pollinations course, although there wasn't an increase in words per minute, they were reading at a relatively high level speed. And the next step, what can we do? Because there is a strict curriculum, we can't really introduce extensive reading. So, that's something that I'd like to discuss with everyone else later. Okay, but a good thing was because Rob and I did this and we showed our results to all our coworkers, the person in charge of the reading program said, wow, you guys are doing a good job. And from this year, speed reading was actually implemented into the reading program. So our hard work, our action research actually helped the university. So hopefully all the students from this year are doing speed reading. So the question is, what can you do in your school? So one thing that I think is very important is try to do first, get the results of the level check test. All first year students, when they go into university, they do like a GTEC or some sort of English proficiency exam to separate the classes. If you can get these kind of results from the administration, you can see how good or how bad they are and adjust your reading content accordingly. Next thing is if you have a strict curriculum, try speed reading as a warm-up, just like we did, and base it on the level. And then slowly introduce them to the graded readers in the university. And the next thing is make sure to record the progress. A lot of the students, they'd be like, oh, my time went up 30 seconds or something like that. And they'd be very, very happy. And in general, everyone increased. You could really see a nice curve where people would increase their words per minute. And last, so what you want to do is you want to make sure to to record your progress and also record these results and put them in the form of a chart, or do like if you have like a FD inside your university, show the results. And this could convince the decision makers in your university to actually maybe start speed reading like they did in our university, or maybe even go as far as doing extensive reading. If you want some help, one thing that you can do is you can get into touch with the Extensive Reading SIG. We have like monthly meetings at the end of the month every Sunday. There's a lot of people that you can talk to. And there's another QR code below. You can check out Paul Nation's resources. there's a speed reading course from the 500 word level up to the 4,000 word level. So if you're teaching at like Tokyo University of Foreign Studies, you would probably use the 3,000 or 4,000 word level. If you're teaching at a university like us, you'd probably start off with the 500 word series. Okay, so just the overall conclusion. So we think that speed reading is a very powerful tool, and it can be, because we can do it in under 5 minutes, it can be easily implemented into any course that you're teaching, even if you're not teaching reading. And since it can help with high stakes English proficiency tests, you can easily get supports from your students. A lot of my students, what I tell them is that if you increase your reading speed, when you do your Eiken test or your TOEIC test, you can actually get to the end of your test. And because it's so easy, all you have to do is record the progress on a speed chart. It's easy to get evidence for decision makers. Okay. So now I'd like to open up for any questions on the floor. So if you have any questions for us or any suggestions, or if you want some advice on speed reading or sensor reading, please feel free to ask.
Good question. How do you guide your students to speed read? For example, read in chunks, focus on space in between words, etc. To be honest, I mean, Tekka, you can back me up on this, but I mean, we mostly just focused on getting through it in whatever way they felt comfortable with. You know, they have the reading to do, and yes, they have the questions to answer, but the one instruction that we did give them was, look, read, do what you can, answer them, and then check your accuracy. If you got less than 5 correct, then maybe slow down a little bit. If you got 7 or 8 correct, well, maybe you can speed up a bit and still have a reasonable amount of accuracy. So just trying to dial that in was the main instruction we had. Tekka?
Yeah. And also, if you download the PDF from Pollination's website, I think on page 3 or 4, there's some guidelines. So first thing is, don't use your fingers, don't do /reading, and don't read out the words, because when you read out the words, it's actually slower. And we say, just use your eyes. And the most important thing is make sure that they know over 95% of the words. So I think setting the right level of the speed reading course for your students is the most important. We didn't really explain it earlier, but what we did was we used a projector and we had a timer on the top of the screen. It would be like 3, 2, 1, go, and then they would start reading. So it's kind of fun because it's like a race.
Yeah. So in the first semester we'd have that the reading itself would be projected, but we'd also have a timer. So when people finished it, then they could go to the timer and mark down their time. For the second section, the readings are all on their phones. So we figured if they did any reading at all, it was probably on their phones. So it's a familiar medium, and it probably wouldn't be the case that they needed glasses or had a bad view of it from the back of the room or on the side. So, we think that probably helped a lot with, adjusting speeds. So, they could basically control. However, a lot of people still think paper is king. The problem is that paper is a bit more expensive and hard to reproduce. Okay.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Reading comprehension test. Think you mean, for example, please. Ms. Moriarty, sorry.
Yeah. Have you ever tried reading comprehension test to your student at the beginning of the semester or at the end of the semester? If you did something like that, you have done that, I'd like to know the results.
Oh, okay. We don't have any money because it was only our class doing the speed reading course. So we didn't do it. but our students are required to do the Eiken IBA. And I've tried it in the first year and second year with my first year students and my second year students. And I found out the classes that did do the speed reading, a lot more people were able to pass the Eiken IBA requirement for our university earlier. So the first years that did the speed reading, the first and second semester, I think almost all of them have passed the second year requirements already. So, and by my second year students last year, I had to wait till till the February. We had a final Eiken IBA test, and they were like, "Oh my God, Tekka Sensei, I can't get into third year because I haven't passed the Eiken IBA." And those people, I didn't do speed reading. So I think yeah, but there are a lot of studies. For example, Beniko Mason from Shitennoji University, she did a pre-post study for sensor reading in for TOEIC. So if you look in Saini or Eric, there are a lot of studies where they check the base exam and the TOEIC exam FX for a lot of exams in Japan. So it's easy to get evidence.
And just one thing to add, sorry, at Meikai, this year finally we've introduced, a program-wide progress checks. So actually, very exact same test 3 times in a year. So hopefully we can get some really usable data for, measuring progress over the course of the program. So yeah, they would be taking it a total of 6 times over 2 years. So we're still fine-tuning it, but hopefully that'll be actionable within the next year or so.
I have a question about your progress test. Does it include the checking the speed as well as comprehension both? Progress test means
in the sense that it is timed, that the questions do get progressively more difficult, and actually a lot of students did not manage to finish within the time. So we're seeing if, there's fewer blank questions by the end of it. So that's one way to sort of indirectly measure the speed. But as for directly measuring speed, that's not part of this test yet. I'm trying to talk to the stakeholders and see if it's adjustable in that sense.
Thank you.
But thank you for your question.
Yeah. And I think there was a question about students not being engaged. I think because first of all, the Yomitori 50, I think a lot of people were interested because it's a story about this American girl coming to Kyoto, and it's like a story. There's a love story in between as well, between the girl and Shota, and they become boyfriends. So it was kind of fun. And also it's seasonal, so they like in spring they have cherry blossom season. Summer they have stories about fireworks. So it's all content is all based in Japan. And also because it's only once they get used to it and they use the Google Forms, and it's only 5 minutes, so we didn't have to worry about people getting bored or disengaged. We also made sure that everyone wrote their time on the progress chart, and you could see everyone going up. We'd be like, "Yeah, you did better this time," and we actually did a lot of like cheering. Actually, a lot of cheering.
That being said, though, I mean, this is first class, often first or second period. These are university students. Some of them were late or sleepy when they came in. So in that case, we might try to eliminate that data point if that's a real outlier. So that's why we had multiple sessions. We could, work around it. So thanks. Thank you. And as for moving through the textbook quickly, yeah, have we found improvement in that area? Well, it's partly coincided with more of a move away from extensive text or more textbook reading. But it's not like we don't have reading to do. I think in general, I mean, it's just anecdotal, but I feel like students are able to handle the readings a bit better. not so much in like the integrated English course, but for example, in the writing course, there's things that they have to read and they get through it with less difficulty than before. But what we're planning to do this semester is to interview some of these students, maybe do another follow-up test and see, you know, how much of this improvement has stuck, if their attitudes have changed. So if you're interested in catching us at the JAL conference in Shizuoka in November, it'll be expanding upon this with what we're working on at the present.
So also, I think the vocabulary section, the textbook always has a vocabulary section where we do fill in the blanks, and I think they kind of went through that a little bit quicker than before after doing the speed reading.
But again, a lot of the textbook, it's more intensive, you know, and mostly it's the attitude adjustment, I think, that has been more robust. But that's what we hope to investigate more this semester. Thanks for the question. What was the range between the highest and lowest performers? For the students who made the highest gains, have you asked them what they were doing? Good question. Tekka, we had some data earlier in there, some examples.
Uh,
Jump back a bit.
so what do you mean by what about what they
So-
were doing? If they did the speed reading a little bit differently, or
So, here, for
No.
example, yeah.
You said like how many words they were able to like read more. And I was wondering, like, you had a range between the students that gained more reading
Oh,
speed.
right. For example, here, like our total change or percent change.
Yeah, but the range is between students, the lower performers versus the higher performers.
Oh, sure. So as an example here, the ID is the like identifying students anonymously. So student 003 had the largest change here. 019 had, I guess, the greatest negative change in this sense.
Did you
And-
interview like the higher performers?
Let's see. Yeah, I mean, the higher performers tended to be more optimistic about reading in the first place, which did help. We need to dig more into the data and compare, you know, changes in attitudes with improvements in reading speed, because our suspicion is that they are in fact correlated. But you know, the problem is discerning, you know, that there is some noise in the data, but I think this semester is where we'll probably ask a few more questions, check out the surveys, see if they are doing any reading either in their classes or outside. And I think that'll help illustrate the issue. Sorry, thank you for the question.
Do you mind if I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Please go.
You mentioned before that in the reading classes that they were now implementing speed reading. Is that right, from this year?
yes.
Okay, so obviously you're working in an integrated English program. If you had more control over the reading aspect of the course, how would you like to implement speed reading based on your data and your own experiences?
Rob, do you want to say what you say, and then I'll give my point.
Honestly, I mean, you know, I do have the interest in game-based learning and, you know, to some extent gamification. I think that there are ways to provide incentive, at least, for some more like extended reading, you know, number of words, get yourself on an anonymized leaderboard, maybe even some rewards for certain milestones of reading. I think that, you know, really encouraging reading of fun, easy books outside of class is really what makes the difference for a lot of students, you know. We have opportunities for some students to do the study abroad. You know, we've got a program where people go to Hawaii, and to do that, they need to interview, they need to beat out some other students, they need to show that they're motivated. And that's the kind of opportunity where I think the reading can really help make a difference. So I would like to have, we have a library of graded readers, but students don't know about them or don't make it a priority of their time. And I think some other incentives could really make it make it more popular. Tekka?
Yeah. So one thing I did was, because of last year's program, I actually talked with the librarians, and for all of my classes, I actually took them to the library at least once a semester, once at the beginning and once at the end. And this year we have Disney graded readers, and we're going to get Marvel graded readers. And if I looked at the library rankings of the most borrowed books, and there's a lot of people borrowing the Disney readers.
Okay.
Yeah. What if I had a choice? I would just get rid of the first semester book, and introduce this system called X reading. Because the good thing about X reading is it has books from like more than 8 or 9 publishers, and they have a lot of like comic. Like, so there's a series called Vera, the Alien Hunter from Korea. There's a lot of nonfiction, lots of sports stuff for our sports students. And what we could do is we can, recommend books depending on the students' interests. Right now, everyone has to follow the same program. We're kind of forcing them to read about the girl from the US coming to Kyoto, or forcing them to do the stories from around the world. And there's a study by Yashima, I think. And they said, like, I think 40% of students don't even care about stuff abroad. So forcing them to read about stories about the US, North America, or whatever is not very interesting for 30-40% of students. If we have more content that's Japanese or to the students' interests, they'll be more likely to be able to read. So for me, if it was my choice, I would do extensive reading, so each student could read at their level, and in the end, they could increase their overall reading fluency faster.
Well,
Yeah.
seeing as we jumped into extensive reading, I'd like to ask one more brief question, if I may. My students are doing extensive reading, and they're supposed to write a report about it, and they just pick the easiest books they can find. Like, if they could pick See Spot Run, they would pick that book. But it's pretty much, fairy tales or something very limited. Like, you mentioned using Marvel and Disney, but like, is there any other way that you would encourage students to choose something really in line with their interests, rather than just, the simplest option to fulfill a course requirement?
So if you use M-Reader, which is a system created by Kyoto Sangyo University, or X-Reading, you can actually filter some of the books.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So you can filter out See Spot Run in the Oxford Reading Tree series. But I find that it's very common. There was a study at Meisei University, and they were asked, what kind of graded readers do you like? And the top graded readers for that university was also the Oxford Reading Tree, because the students can finish it in like 10 minutes.
Sure.
So it's very common. One thing that some people do, if you're the hardcore extensive reading people, they don't make them write reports. They give them they're asked to give them like a 5-star rating, and at the end they're supposed to give a recommendation. So what kind of person would like to read this book? And what we do is we get students to do janken and interview each other. What book did you read? How was it? And what kind of person? And can you tell me a little bit about it? And who would want to read this book? So if you're into like horror stories, you might read this book, or if you're into sci-fi. And then what happened was, when I did this in my high school, just through the recommendations, they'd be like, "Oh, can I read that book? Can I borrow it after you?" And the student recommendations help much more than the teacher recommendations. So I guess I'm too old for the students now. So
It reminds me of back when you could rent videos, the staff's recommendations. Like, actually, there's some good films here, and that would be a popular shelf. So yeah, I mean, I think the peer recommendation element of it, setting some limits on it, and I mean, from a gamified perspective, you know, it could be that the more challenging books have a somewhat greater reward. I mean, you know, if you're talking about like Zelda, for example, you wouldn't be just beating up on the easiest enemies. You'd want to move up because you'd make more progress. And, you know, I mean, that's where that sort of those game elements can be informative, you know, kind of a guiding principle. But that's you know, what you can implement, that's another story. But I you have a gaming chair, I assume you know game elements.
Never even considered it. Thank you both for answering my question.
Yeah. So also, I think one more thing that I know a teacher in Osaka does is she does read alouds. So she tries to introduce one of the series, like the first book of a series that she thinks her students would like. And the students would listen to it, and then she put out the whole series on the table. Say, if you like the story, why don't you read it yourself? And she found that the students actually reacted very well to listening. And the lady Beniko Mason that I talked about earlier, she's into story listening before extensive reading. And what she does is she tells stories and she draws the really beautiful pictures and explains the story as kind of like a picture story. And then she tells me, okay, why don't you try reading some of these books? And she's been pretty successful for university and also like regular adults in the after school program.
Yeah, you know, we focus on the numbers and the percents and everything, but like the enjoyment of reading is something that, you know, often gets left by the wayside. And yeah, I mean, being read to is a pretty nice experience. I mean, my kids love it. So anyway, yeah, hopefully the younger one will start reading on her own soon. So okay. All right, are there any other questions from anyone, or sorry to keep you long, I know everyone's busy, but okay. Well, again, we'd like to say thank you very much for this opportunity. You know, if you are interested in any other you know, speed reading or extensive reading, if you're doing anything, we'd love to hear from you. You know, please check out the extensive reading SIG as well. And yeah, if you want to see how things are going on, please stop in and talk to us at JALT conference in November.
Yep.
But everyone, thank you very much.
Yep.
Yeah.
And if you're interested, I put in the link for Pollination speed reading course and story listening from Beniko Mason from Shitennoji University. And yeah, thank you very much.